Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Now, normally I don't care about the cast, but for those new to the entitled community, there is me, some kid across the street, the entitled mom, the kid's dad, the autistic kid, he's actually autistic so please don't say I'm trying to be offensive, and the teacher. Howdy folks, let me tell you all a story about the time I got caught up in a wild ride with an entitled parent, all because of a simple school project. You see, this all happened in my 7th grade Texas history class, and boy was it a day to remember. It was a regular old Tuesday and a teacher told us to form groups and pick 3 innovations that were made in Texas and affected the economy. My group was a typical bunch of 7th grader, and we decided that Barney, that friendly purple dinosaur, was a top choice for our list. You know, the one that sings and dances on TV. We figured he was made in Dallas, so why not? Part of the assignment was to draw a picture of our chosen innovation. Now, to get some reference images for our artistic endeavors, I hopped on a trusty school computer and googled Barney. I was looking through the images trying to find a decent one when I stumbled upon a peculiar photo. It was a mugshot of Barney, and the charge was drunk and disorderly. I couldn't believe my eyes, so I showed it to my friend for a quick laugh. This is where the craziness begins. The autistic child, that's his initials by the way, came up to us and looked over my shoulder. He saw the mugshot and exclaimed, "Barney killed someone?" I was taken aback and didn't know how to respond. The kid then dashed over to the teacher and yelled, "Barney killed someone." The teacher, looking quite alarmed, asked, "Who told you that?" And the kid quickly responded, "Somebody told me." The teacher turned his attention to me and walked over as I was trying to Google 3D printers for our project. He said, "Show me your search history." I replied, "I'm on private browsing, there is no history." But the teacher insisted. "Okay, press the back arrow." So I complied and clicked the back arrow, which revealed my previous search. Barney the killer in the search bar. The teacher looked at me with a puzzled expression and asked, "Why were you Googling that?" I explained after we found out that Barney was made in Dallas, we decided to use him as our first innovation. While looking up photos for insert name here to trace, I came across this photo pointing at the mugshot that came with my last Barney search. And that's when the entitled child saw it and he went to you and said what he said. I was just curious, that's all. The teacher nodded, "Well, there isn't really any proof." Then he extended his hand. "Give me your phone." I hesitated but eventually handed my phone over. The teacher examined it for a few minutes and then handed it back saying, "Here is your phone. Don't look up any more inappropriate things." So I thought that was the end of it, but little did I know that my day was about to take an unexpected turn. As I went to my next period, I was suddenly called to the principal's office. When I walked in, I found myself face to face with not only the principal but also the entitled mother, the kid's dad, I guess, and the autistic kid. My parents weren't there because they both had busy work schedules and couldn't just drop everything to come to the school on a whim. The principal greeted me, "Hello." But before I could say anything, the entitled mother cut him off. "Have anything to say?" she snapped. I replied hesitantly, if it's about the Barney thing, then..." The entitled mother interrupted again. "No, don't play dumb with me." The principal, a bit flustered, tried to intervene. "Ma'am, if you could please be silent and let this young man explain his side regarding the bullying reports." I was taken aback by the mention of bullying. Bullying? I never did any such thing. I protested, but the entitled mother was having none of it. "Yes, you did." I challenged her. "Do you even have proof, bro?" "Yeah, I actually said that." But the entitled mother responded, "You know exactly what I mean." I shook my head, genuinely confused. "I really don't." The entitled mother started to lose her cool. She began screeching, reaching into her purse and pulled out pepper spray along with one of those self-defense metal rods. She began advancing towards me, spraying pepper spray and swinging the stick menacingly. In the heat of the moment, I had to act fast. Now here is the kicker. I'm in the Sea Cadets and I have some martial arts training under my belt. I knew how to handle such situations. First, I grabbed the wrist she was swinging the stick with to gain control. She tried to break free, so I twisted her wrist, causing her to drop the stick. While she was momentarily distracted by the pepper spray, I snatched it from her hand and sprayed it back at her. Before long, the school police arrived, summoned by the principal who had been calling them, and the kid's dad was trying to hold back the entitled mother, and the autistic kid was sitting in his chair. Before long, the school police arrived, summoned by the principal who had been calling them. The kid's dad was trying to hold back the entitled mother, and the autistic child was sitting in his chair, still not fully comprehending the situation. The entitled mother was arrested on the spot, and I wasn't entirely sure what happened after that. I learned that a court date was set for a week later, and I promised myself to update everyone on how things unfolded when I got the news. I still can't believe how a simple village beauty pageant for little girls turned into a chaotic showdown that made it to this subreddit. It was a hot summer day, and our small village decided to host a fair to raise money for the volunteer firefighters. They needed new equipment, and everyone in town came out to support them. But as always, some moms and grandmas took things way too seriously. The pageant had two categories, 2 to 4 years old and 5 to 6 years old. The rules were simple. The kids just had to walk down the runway in their cutest dresses. That's it. No elaborate talent acts or anything like the big televised pageants. It was in a massive tent, big enough for about 1,000 people, but only a third filled with moms, grandmas, and anyone who couldn't escape fast enough. My brother's ex-mother-in-law was one of the most enthusiastic attendees, and she brought her 3-year-old granddaughter to compete. The older kids had already done their thing, and now it was time for the little ones. This cute 3-year-old girl, all dolled up in her pretty white dress and makeup, stepped onto the stage. She was adorable, and all she had to do was walk from one side to the other and back. But there were these lovely flower arrangements in the middle, and the child couldn't resist stopping to smell them, completely oblivious to the rest of the world. The crowd was loving it, and everyone was going, "Aww." Then, out of the blue, my brother's ex-mother-in-law lost her mind. She stood up and shouted, "What are you doing? You're trying to steal the show. That's so unfair." She stormed onto the stage, grabbed the poor kid's arm, and dragged her off. The child began to cry and scream for her mom. It was a big mistake. Grandma, she had awakened the mama bear. The little girl's mom rushed onto the stage, grabbed her by the hair, spun her around, and screamed, "Let my daughter go." In her shock, Grandma let go for a moment, and that was all Mama Bear needed to retaliate. She unleashed a powerful right hook, the kind Muhammad Ali would have admired. It broke Grandma's nose and gave her a hairline jaw fracture. Grandma, who was maybe in her mid-50s, shrieked and attempted to strike back, but the volunteer firefighters intervened and pulled them apart. At this point, the pageant had turned into a complete circus, but Grandma insisted on involving the police. They separated the two women, one on each side of the tent, and awaited the arrival of the cops. When the officers arrived, they began interviewing witnesses to piece together what had happened. After gathering some information, they turned to Grandma for her side of the story, and she insisted on pressing charges. The cop tried to convince her otherwise, warning that if she continued, they would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Grandma could not tolerate the idea that her actions would land her in hot water. However, she kept interrupting the cop before he could finish his warning. The officer gave up and said, "You asked for it," and Grandma was subsequently arrested for kidnapping a minor, and the realization finally hit her. She might be in real trouble. She tried to backtrack, but the cop reminded her that she had numerous chances to de-escalate the situation, yet she persisted in wanting to get a mother into trouble for defending her child against a crazy lady, as the cop put it. Grandma couldn't accept that she was a villain here and tried to attack the cop. In response, she got tasered by his partner. 6 months later, Grandma appeared before a judge and was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 1,000 hours of social work. As for the mom, she received something far sweeter than punishment, a cake from all her neighbors. They all loathed the grandma, particularly after her antics at the pageant. Any charges against the mom were dropped because she had acted in self-defense of her daughter against a potentially dangerous kidnapper. There was a brief argument in court about whether it was justified for her to punch the grandma given that grandma had already let go of the child. However, her lawyer argued that she couldn't have known if the danger had truly passed or if the grandma had simply released the child to attack her, so punching the grandma was deemed fully justified. I'm a 20-year-old woman and my husband is 36. We got married last year and are currently 12 weeks pregnant, which is super exciting for us. But here is the thing. We've had a little disagreements with my parents that's been bothering me, and I want to know if I'm the jerk in this situation. To give you some context, my husband and I had very different upbringings. His parents are super nice, welcoming, and treated me like a daughter even before we were engaged. But my family, well, not so much. My dad was pretty authoritarian and, as I've come to realize, emotionally abusive as well, though I did not recognize it at the time. Many friends and specialists I've talked to have described him that way too. My mom, on the other hand, was a wonderful stay-at-home mom, caring and loving, but she never really stood up for us when my dad was acting wrong. She privately told us she agreed with us, but it wasn't her place to question him. Since my parents became empty nesters, my dad has improved somewhat, but he still doesn't think he did anything wrong with the way he raised us, or maybe just one or two things. Whenever we brought it up, he dismisses our concerns, saying that children always complain about their parents and that apologizing now won't make a difference. I strongly disagree. Being surrounded by the love of my wonderful husband and his family, and now with our little one on the way, I've come to realize just how awful my upbringing was. My biggest goal in life is to be nothing like my parents when it comes to raising my own children. Now, my parents were overjoyed to hear about their first grandbaby. They talked about how I could always leave the child with them if my husband and I ever needed a babysitter, and it sent shivers down my spine. I have flashbacks of all the yelling, feeling neglected and unloved, and all those strict rules and punishments. My dad noticed something was up, asked if something was wrong, and I tried to brush it off by saying that my husband's family was closer, so we probably rely on them more for babysitting, but he didn't buy it. He asked if we had a problem leaving our child with them. Hormones got the better of me and I answered. I told him that I didn't trust them to leave my child alone with them. I didn't believe that they would treat my child better than how they treated me, and I didn't want my child to ever feel the way I felt growing up. Their reaction was surprising. My mom got misty-eyed and my dad was shocked, asking why I would say something like that. I reminded him of all the stuff he did as a dad, but he just said, "That's all in the past. I don't understand why it matters now." And that's when I lost my temper and slammed my hands on the table, yelling, "This is why it matters. You don't listen. You've never listened. Why the heck would I trust you to listen to my feelings and boundaries when it comes to my child when you can't even pretend to care about my feelings when I was your child?" His response? "It's not nice to swear." It's like my words just went in one ear and out the other. So I don't know, am I the jerk for telling my parents I don't trust them with my child? I can't help but feel like I might be in the wrong here, but I can't just ignore my past experiences and let history repeat itself with my own child. So Reddit, am I the jerk? And now with some comments on the post. Someone saying, "You're not the jerk." It's worth pointing out that a lot of people are far more mellow as grandparents than as parents. I would suggest watching closely how they interact with your kids and then making decisions about limiting contact later. I certainly wouldn't leave the child alone with them though unless/until you get comfortable. Congrats on the baby. Another commenter adds, "You're not the jerk." Oh yes, the old swear words invalidate facts clause. I know it well. I sympathize so deeply because I hope to be in this situation shortly if the IVF goes as planned. I love a lot of people I'm never leaving my baby with. A third commenter goes with, "Not the jerk, you're already rockin' being a mama bear. You got this. It sounds like your husband's family is full of lovely people to fall back on when you need a village. This isn't my story, but it comes from my dad and other family members who witnessed it. Background: this all went down in the late 1970s when my dad was 17. The area he grew up in was in the UK and was a stereotypical working class town. The part of town my family lived in was run down, full of poor families and had its fair share of crime. But it was close-knit and everyone knew everyone. This will be important later. Now, my dad wasn't the most well-behaved kid and he hated being at school. But aside from a speeding ticket, he had never been in trouble with the police. He was, and still is, a really talented musician and had a very active social life. For his 17th birthday, one of his friends had bought him a leather jacket with a very specific logo on it. We will call this friend Dave for future reference. According to my dad, it was a rare and quite expensive motorcycle jacket, and he was extremely happy that Dave had got it for him. Dave had bought himself the same jacket a while before, and it was a big surprise. My grandmother apparently joked that with the jackets on, they looked like twins, and she wasn't far wrong. They had similar features, black hair, and were both well known for being kitted out in motorcycle gear. A few days after my dad's birthday, he was leaving work as a bartender in the town center at around 10 p.m. As he was getting close to where his bike was parked, a gang of 5 men approached him from behind. The last thing my dad remembers was being smacked over the head and passing out as he hit the floor. These men beat up my dad with bike chains and a crowbar, literally to within an inch of his life. Luckily, 2 bouncers from a nearby pub had heard the commotion and rushed to help. The men ran off, and the bouncers called the police and my dad was taken to the hospital. It turned out that Dave had quite a substantial gambling habit and owed a large amount of money to people who you really didn't want to owe money to. They had threatened Dave and told him that they would be looking for him to teach him a lesson. So Dave decided to set up my dad to take the beating instead of him, or at least lessen his chances of taking it. He had bought my dad the same jacket because these guys knew that was what he wore when he rode. He then arranged for a guy he knew to find out when my dad left work and call up the loan sharks to let them know where Dave was. What a jerk. Their revenge. My grandfather and mother were obviously distraught about this whole thing. The first thought on my grandfather's mind was if my dad would survive. When that was answered, the second was how best to get revenge. Bit of background on my grandfather. He was a lifelong boxer and a career military man. He enlisted at the back end of World War II at 17, stayed in the forces through Korea, and then served in Malaya and Burma as a scout and sniper during the mid to late 1950s. He only reluctantly retired when my dad was little and worked as an engineer after his discharge. This guy was a certified badass even into his 50s. And although he wasn't the best husband or father at times, he could never stand by and watch his family get hurt. The first move my grandfather made was to call up every ex-service buddy, bouncer, pub landlord, etc. that he knew, and even a few less than legit characters he knew from the pubs. In my town, word traveled fast. My grandfather was well liked and had a bit of a reputation, so it wasn't long before he had the names and addresses of the 5 men who had attacked my dad. Apparently, these guys had been bragging about beating up a defenseless man from behind. These guys were career criminals with violent reputations, but my grandfather really didn't care who or what they were. My grandfather then called up a few of the most dangerous, hardened guys he knew from the service. He explained to them what had happened and they were all happy to help. One night, the group kicked in the doors of each thug and paid them to a pulp. All 5 of them. They knew that if they hit one, the others would hear about it and run, so they hit all 5 of them in one night. My grandfather knew that no one would call the police in the area they lived in. Talking to the cops was a big no-no in that area back then, so there was little chance of being caught. All 5 guys ended up bloodied with broken bones, shattered teeth, and a requirement to be fed from a tube by the end of the night. One of them had to be put in a medically induced coma. Of course, the police interviewed all of them in hospital when they sufficiently recovered, but none of them talked. It was out of fear of my grandfather and fear they would be labeled as rats. Nothing came of it. But my grandfather wasn't done there. My grandfather used his connections in the clubs and bars to start spreading rumors about why they had been beaten up. Soon, it had gotten around that these 5 guys had screwed up and had beaten up the wrong person. Not only that, but they had bragged about it and lied to whoever they worked for about it. Not only were they physically broken, but my grandfather ruined their credibility. So that when they got out, no one, criminal or otherwise, wanted to be associated with them. Once this was all done, my grandfather turned his attention to Dave. He had specifically left Dave for last, knowing that he would crap himself knowing that my grandfather knew what he had done. My grandfather, however, was much more subtle in dealing with Dave, as he thought that a simple beating would be too good for him. He waited and asked around, and it turned out that Dave was not only a compulsive gambler but also had recently turned into a heavy drug addict as well. My grandfather found out who he was buying his drugs from, when he would usually buy, and where. He had a buddy of his follow Dave when he went to buy his stuff, follow him to where he was living, and let my grandfather know. My grandfather then called in an anonymous tip that there was a huge drug deal going on at the address, and he thought he heard gunshots. He got 2 of his buddies to do the same. The police investigated, searched the house, and caught Dave red-handed with boatload of drugs in his home, as well as counterfeit bills and a ton of other illegal stuff. Dave was charged, denied bail, and ended up pleading guilty to all the charges laid against him. My dad could never remember his exact sentence, but it was definitely heavy, at least 15 years. To add to that, Dave owed a lot of money to a lot of people, and let's just say his time in prison was made much worse by this fact. My dad never spoke to him again. His parents disowned him, his girlfriend dumped him, he struggled to get a job with his record, and when he got out, he had to move miles away as no one he knew wanted anything to do with him. My dad eventually recovered from his injuries, although you can still see various scars on his body from the beating he took. My grandfather never told anyone what he had done until my dad asked him about it when he got really ill in the early 1990s. Dave's life was ruined, and out of the 5 who attacked my dad, 3 ended up in prison later in life and 2 ended up dead due to crime. My grandfather passed away in the late 1990s, and although my dad and him had their issues, it could never be said he didn't look out for him when he needed it.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.